From We Run With You, I'm Kathy Wynn.
And I'm Rob Alvarez. This is Doing Good. This season, we interview brain aneurysm survivors and caregivers to learn how they are navigating new challenges and finding their own way of doing good.
If you were to look up beast mode, you'd likely find a picture of Robi Simone. With only 10 miles left in the bike portion of Ironman Wisconsin, Robi found herself out of nowhere, battling with double vision. She somehow still managed to complete the 112-mile bike leg to T2 and rack her bike. But this wasn't where she had to be strong. It was the next 7 weeks when she had to endure insurmountable pain in her search for proper treatment for her brain aneurysm and fight for her life. Hi, Robi.
Hi, Robbie.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I just wanted to get right into it and ask, how did you discover you had a brain aneurysm?
Mine was really dramatic.
We
'Cause
love
I
dramatic stories.
it's a little long. But to not give an entire race report, they found my aneurysm incidentally as a result of kind of what I just coined a brain meltdown at Ironman Wisconsin in 2021. So, Ironman being that swim, and then I get through 112 miles on the bike ride. I started having issues with like 10 miles to go on the bike ride.
Oh,
Oh,
man.
wow, so
I
close.
started having double
So
vision.
close.
Yeah. Well, I finished the bike ride. So I started having double vision, 10 miles left,
Oh my gosh.
but there's nowhere to stop in Wisconsin. Like there's nowhere, like you're done, like get back to transition.
Mhm.
So that's really all I could focus on was,
You're able to
um,
stay on the bike with having double vision? Oh my
Oh,
gosh.
my. You're tough.
yeah. I didn't really know what else to do at the time. So as soon as I got to transition, with Wisconsin, you have to bike up a helix. And so I get to the top and I'm on the roof and they're like, get off at the line. I'm like, I don't know where the line is.
Yeah.
Which line?
Oh my gosh.
Because I saw a lot of them. And so that's when they realized something was wrong. And they had me go and I had to rack my own bike because the volunteer they sent with me didn't know how to rack
Oh,
it. So he's keeping me talking the whole time. And it wasn't until I kind of sat down that I went into kind of like a shock. And then I started to go in and out of consciousness.
Oh my.
And so they took me by gator first to the medical tent at the finish line. And then they took me to the ambulance, to the hospital. I got to interrupt the race course for the runners. So sorry if you raced, you had to wait for me. But yeah, it was there in the hospital. I started having seizures, and then they were like, "Oh, by the way," when I finally woke up the next morning, because I was kind of like in my own self-induced coma, they were like, "Oh, hey, you have an aneurysm."
Oh wow.
Um,
So
So yeah,
did it rupture that that day or
no,
oh,
mine never ruptured.
oh
okay.
wow.
So I never had a ruptured aneurysm. They never really found out what happened to me in Wisconsin, like whether it was the aneurysm, which they think it probably wasn't. But they ran all my labs. Everything was normal. They really have no idea, which is why I just, like I said, I kind of call it my brain just stopped working
Mhm.
because,
Oh
like,
wow.
my vision, when I had double vision the whole time I went through everything, it never corrected itself. So I still have double vision today.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they said my muscles just stopped putting the images together. So I see double because I have what's called convergence insufficiency. So like I can't cross my eyes, they kick out, they don't do anything. But yeah.
Oh my gosh.
All I'm gonna say is because I don't know who found each other first. If it was, I think it was you, Robbie, that found We Run With You, and then I think because you ended up joining the 3,000, yeah, the 3,000 challenge, and so I ended up stalking you. Of course, whoever ends up doing any of our challenges, I look into their profile um, and when I found out what happened to you, all I was thinking was, "Holy crap." Like, that's just I can't even imagine the fact that now that you're telling me you had double vision for the last 10 miles, but it's true, I think your body at that time, that's all you know to do is you need to get to that transition, right? There's no other way. I don't know. Maybe I would have been different, just like put my bike over to the side and like, "Okay, let's just hope that sag wagon
Somebody come
comes
pick me
soon."
up.
See, and a
Right?
lot of people ask me, they're like, "Why didn't you just stop?" And I'm
Yeah.
like, "Well, yeah, I don't know. I just thought I'd just get there eventually." But then I'm so glad though, looking back for myself that I didn't
Okay.
because it seemed like the adrenaline's what carried me into
Mm,
T2. Because it
Okay.
was as soon as they sat me down, like the last thing I did, I was like, because I remember they're like, "You can't continue." And I was like, "Are you sure? Maybe I should try. Like, what if I just
Of
put my
course.
shoes on and just like see how it goes? Like, and then if it gets bad, I'll stop again." And I was like, this, because this is kind of, I've had it happen a little bit before with the double vision on a half Ironman earlier in the year. And my
mm,
doctor, I went and got checked, like, "Oh, you were just tired." And I'm like, "Oh, okay."
mm,
Who knows? But if I had stopped, like as soon as they sat me down, I gave them my husband's phone number and I was like, "He'll know what to do. Just, he'll take care of everything." And
mm.
they're like, "Really?" And I'm like, "Here's his number." And that was the last thing I did was give somebody his phone number because then they sat me down. And like I said, I went into shock. I
Mhm.
started losing consciousness. So, I mean, if that had happened on the side of the road,
Yeah.
he
That
would never have
Yeah.
known.
mm.
So that was the last thing you remembered was
Yeah, I was gonna
giving his number to humans?
I remember that, and then I remember being in the ambulance because they were a big fan of sternal rubs, and I thought they hurt really bad, and that was apparently the only thing. So they were like, "She only responds to pain," so they just kept doing it,
Oh my gosh.
and
Wait,
they
what
start
is that?
yelling at me like, "What's your
what is that?
a sternal rub?" Oh, they push down really hard, like
Oh my gosh.
the most painful, like knuckles dug into your chest to get you to react.
Oh
Oh,
my
wow.
goodness.
'Cause they want to
Yeah,
keep
and
you conscious, I guess?
well, I was going in and out, so they were
Okay.
trying to keep me conscious,
Yeah.
Okay.
and
Oh my
so
god.
I remember telling them, like, I started feeling like this fuzzy feeling, like my, when your legs fall asleep, I started feeling that all over my body, and I didn't say anything because, I mean, at the time I was like, whatever, this is happening, it's happening. And I remember them yelling at me, and they're like, "What's your name? Tell me your name." And I was like, "Relax, I know who I am." And that lights out.
Yeah.
So do you or you probably didn't know at the time, but did anyone tell you, like, how long it was between the time you reached T2 and getting to the hospital?
Yeah.
It was 4 hours until somebody paused my
Oh,
Garmin.
I love that. I love you, Robbie. You have, like, the ultimate
Don't stop it. I
triathlete.
might go
Yeah,
back on the course yet.
exactly.
Do not stop it.
But I mean, it was very quick from the time I got to T2 to the hospital was maybe half an hour, if
Wow.
that.
Okay.
That's good.
Because they found my husband, and while they were getting him into T2, they had a medical gator coming. But this was one of the first races in like the post COVID
Mm.
era in 2021, and so everything was outdoors, but they had up all like that Ironman branded mesh fencing. And so they were kind of limited in how they could get in and out. And they actually ended up cutting the mesh for
Oh,
me.
wow.
Yay. But yeah, they ended up cutting through everything to get the gator in and out to get me to the medical tent. And then my husband said the medical director at the finish line took a look at me and was like, "Yeah, no, she's going in the ambulance right now." And
Mhm.
then he said it was lights and sirens to the ER. And then he said it was almost like an episode of Grey's Anatomy because I'm a little obsessed with the old show. I haven't watched new ones. But he's like, "Yeah, you were in this bay and there were like 8 people working on you." And he's like, they cut up all my tri kit clothes. So rest in peace to that.
Aw.
But he saw them take my cycling shoes off and he's like, "Let me get her shoes." So I have my shoes. But yeah, it took a while then, he said, before anybody even thought to like look at my watches or anything like that to stop it. But I got in quickly. So I'm a big advocate to not put road IDs on your watches, like wear it separate.
Uh,
Oh, okay.
Because nobody looked at my watch.
oh, okay.
Okay.
So it's gotta be
Yeah, I
yeah,
have a road ID. Well, oh, so
separate. Yeah.
yeah, I have a separate road ID. So you had your road ID on your watch, like the plate?
I didn't have one at all.
Oh,
Oh,
I had a race I had a bracelet that my mom gave me that said beast mode.
Mhm.
And it's like a wrap bracelet, like those, Momentum jewelry bracelets,
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
they checked that because it has a metal plate, they thought that was a
Ah.
medical alert, and I was like, "Oh," and they're like, "What is beast mode?"
Is some sort of code?
Yeah, wear a separate road ID.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, alright.
No, the reason I ask is that, just thinking about if you did stop on the side of the road and who knows how long somebody would have would have come by to take you to, medical tent or anywhere, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, because I wasn't past any of, like, the SAG bus cutoffs, so I don't know. In fact, I remember everybody telling me, like, "You're still within time, you've still got time, you're gonna make the cutoff." So I was
Mhm.
like, "Great. Let's try to run."
Yeah. Oh, man.
oh wow, that is a crazy story. So how long were you in the hospital for? I guess how was recovery for you?
Well, they actually sent me home the next day because, well, I had a flight to Houston, where I used to live, and
Mhm.
there was a hurricane, so I didn't get home for huh, probably 36 hours after the race. They loaded me up on a lot of anti seizure medication, like 4 times the normal dose, thinking I would get home that night, but then our flights got delayed through
Oh,
our
man.
connection. And they'd basically given my husband like a bunch of like Klonopin or something, and they're like, if she starts having seizures on the plane, just pull her into the aisle and crush these in her mouth and Godspeed.
Oh my gosh, that's scary.
I'm just I'm just baffled that they would even release you because you did say they found an aneurysm, right? That had not ruptured.
Yep.
So, did they indicate to you at least, well, it's gonna be monitored now that we know you have an aneurysm? Is it something that they're gonna have you monitor when you go back home? That there's no you're not in danger of it rupturing? Because
No.
gosh, you know.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, 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 I'm like I said, I'm just baffled. I don't even think I would, wanna go home. It's just but I don't know, but you seem pretty beast mode and tough. You have a pretty high pain threshold, so maybe.
Um, so I ended up at the University of Wisconsin Hospital. So it's a teaching hospital.
Mm,
So I had their neurology people come and talk to me, but they had all of these residents and they were really belaboring that I couldn't drive. Like that was their big focus was
Hmm.
like, you might have seizures on the plane, you're not allowed to drive.
mhm.
And I was like, okay, but like y'all just told me I had an aneurysm. And like I said, Grey's Anatomy, those are bad. So that was
Yeah.
about all I knew about him though. And so as they're like all filing out, two of the residents hung out. They were giving me my discharge instructions and stuff, and two residents hang out and they're like, you need to take this aneurysm seriously.
Yeah.
And it was like it was like haunting almost the way these two guys were talking to me. And they're like, no, really, like when you go home, you need to make sure that this gets addressed. Like this is serious. And I'm like, okay. So that's but mind you, I've now been pumped full of like seizure meds. So I was like Cheech and Chong. I don't really remember most of the afternoon.
Mm.
My sister said I called her while we were boarding the plane, just out of my mind. I have no recollection of this.
Oh.
And then all I remember was like sleeping. I didn't know our planes were delayed because like I just slept. um, but yeah, so those two guys were like, to me, they were the ones that are like, you really needed to get this taken care of. But it didn't, I don't want to say it didn't hit very hard because I know when like the nurse was wheeling me out to the car, like to our Uber, because again, we were traveling,
Mhm.
I was like, you think I can do my mountain bike race in 2 weeks? I had no
Yeah,
concept of what was about to happen.
yeah.
Oh wow. S- Um, I guess I wanted to actually shift gears a little bit and
Yeah.
and ask you about how life was before your aneurysm. What were you always? Have you always been into triathlons, running, swimming, biking growing up?
Yeah, I'm very outdoorsy. When people ask me, especially like triathlon coaches, they're like, "Well, how's your biking?" I'm like, "Well, I'm Dutch, so like we bike." My dad's from the Netherlands, and
Um,
so I've grown up with biking just always.
Mm.
Camping. I've always hated running. I played soccer growing up, up through into college. I was playing soccer, so I've always been pretty athletic. But I got into running because my mom and I made a bet that if I ran a half marathon, she would learn to snowboard.
ah,
And so we both held up our end of the bargain. I ran, I think it was called like the Philadelphia distance run, like ages ago for a half marathon. And then later that winter, I think it was like 2008, she took snowboarding lessons in Colorado.
That is so cool.
Um, yeah, but I hated running. I still hate running to this day. But I stayed with it because it was easy. It's like, oh, it's the cheapest thing you can do. Just go buy a pair of shoes and go run.
That is
And
true.
so I was doing some like random 5K, I think, with like my stepdad because we hang out in the back together. And somebody handed me a thing for a triathlon, and I was like, yeah, let's break up the run. And so that's kind of how I just kind of fell into it a little bit, a bet with my mom and then a pamphlet, before, internet races and things like that were the norm. Like people just handing out flyers at the end of a 5K.
Mhm. Yeah, I can understand. I'm sure you're like, "No, you're totally lying to me, Kathy." Because well, I do. I like to run a lot of marathons, but I'm like you. I hate it running. I hate it running. I was like, "Why do people do this? This is so stupid. Like, why would you run a marathon?" It's like unless I get paid, I'll run a marathon. But that's how I got into triathlons was that's how I got into running was because of triathlon. I was trying to, do that bucket list, like get a sprint, before I turned 40. And I did that. And then you go and watch someone do a 70.3. And like most people say, oh, she must have drank the Kool-Aid and ended up, you know. But yeah, I totally I can understand. I can understand that you hate running because I there are moments when I hate running too. But that's so cool that you had that bet with your mom. And
Yeah, I mean, it's fun. She was not a runner at all either. So she randomly just started running, I think as like empty nest when I was in college.
mm,
She needed something to do. And so she picked up running and then kind of became her life. And it was something then we were able to share after that bet. So
now are you the only child? Are you an only
no, I have three older sisters,
Oh, okay. And do any of
but I'm the favorite.
now do any of them share your passion of triathlons?
No triathlons, but they all run. So my sister did running after her first child. She ran a marathon to lose the baby weight. My other sister started running just to have something to do with me and my mom. We used to travel and do like all the Zuma races. One
Mhm.
year we went around and did all those together. And then my third sister, she's a police officer. And so she runs naturally just to kind of stay in shape, but she used to play soccer too. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of running in soccer. So yeah, generally soccer players are become natural runners.
Runners, yeah.
So not surprised. So how did you I guess did you gradually kind of move up in sort of distance in triathlons or yeah, how did you end up doing or deciding to do Ironman Wisconsin?
So I actually lived in Wisconsin like 10 years ago. And then Ironman was there. So we would always see it. And it's always the weekend of my birthday. So we were always downtown anyways. So then we started volunteering. And there's something about the finish line. Like I wouldn't even know people racing, and I would see people coming across the finish. And it's like I can't watch the finish without crying.
Right.
And I'm not an emotional person. Like I never cry. But if you put me at an Ironman finish line, I don't care if it's the pros or if it's midnight, I'm crying. And I always thought I could never do that. Like I can do sprints, like I like short things, but an Ironman, I was like, no way. So it took me probably like 6 years to be like, I think I can do that. maybe I want to try. And then I had a bunch of friends and one of my bosses actually do Ironman Texas. And I went down there and I was volunteering at that finish line. And I was like, yeah, I want to do this. So after sitting in an airport watching people finish on my phone for Ironman Wisconsin one year, I was like, all right, I'm in. I'm doing it next year. So I signed up, but lo and behold, it was the COVID year. So
Oh, okay.
I had a lot of training. So I felt pretty confident before, like I said,
Yeah.
my brain meltdown
Yeah.
stuff.
Wow. Shifting back to, I guess your, were you how long were you, I guess, recovering from the the ordeal you went through, in Wisconsin? Did you have to have any kind of procedures done, or was it just monitoring at that point?
Another epic story?
Yeah. So like I said, I got home about 36 hours later because we got delayed from a hurricane. And then I started calling when I got back to Houston. I was at my mom's because she had my kids because I have two kids. They're now 6 and 9, but we had to go pick them up, and she's like, you need to call the doctors, like, because they did say, like, right, those two residents were like, you have a brain aneurysm, you need to make sure you follow up when you get back home. So usually when you're discharged from the ER, they're like, hey, call and follow up with your PCP.
Mhm.
So I tried calling, and so stupid. They're like, oh, do you have a fever? No. I was like, do you have a cough? No. The COVID screening questions, and it
Oh,
comes, do you
that's
have
right.
Okay.
a headache? And I'm like, yeah, I have a headache. I've had one for 3 days now, and they're like, oh, we can't see you. And I'm like, what? They're like,
What?
well, you could have COVID. I'm like, no, 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 I have an aneurysm, not
Yeah.
COVID. So they were like, well, you have to call back and talk to neurology. But because of the hurricane, everybody had closed cautiously. So like the call center was open, but I couldn't get the nurse line because the nurse line was closed for the hurricane. So I'm like, okay. So I called my friend because she had a neurologist because she had a bike accident like a year and a half before and had a brain injury as a result of it. So I'm like, hey, who's your neurologist? She's like, oh, call this office. I'm like, great. So I called that office and I'm like, hey, I've been discharged from the ER up in Wisconsin. I need to see a doctor. I have an aneurysm. And they're like, yeah, we can't see you until the end of October.
Oh, man.
And this is the middle of September. So I'm like, oh, I think that's too long because like they said I needed to get followed up quickly. So then I used to work for a hospital. So I'm ranting. It was a children's hospital, but I'm ranting to one of my friends and I'm just like, this is so stupid. Healthcare is
Mm.
dumb. I have a headache. So I think I have COVID. Like I was mad. She's like, oh, well, my friend has a neurologist. Let me talk to her. I'm like, great, you do that. I'm going home taking a nap. So they wake me up. My husband takes my kids to gymnastics because the gym's open, but not the doctors. And I take a nap. My friend calls me. She's like, "Hey, the neurologist wants to talk to you. Can he call you?" I was like, "Yeah, okay, I'll answer." She's like, "Great." So he calls me and he talks to me, and he's like, "So what happened?" And I explained the whole ordeal. And he's like, "Oh yeah, you need to be in the ER right now."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Oh okay." So I'm in like this group chat with my mom and my husband, trying to be like, because, medical stuff, I don't want to translate it every time. So I'm like, hey, can someone give me a ride to the emergency room? They're like, what happened? I'm like, no, 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 it's cool. But this doctor wants me there like now. And so, yeah, my mom came and drove me to the emergency room. So I was probably out of the emergency room like 48 hours for the travel before I got back in. And then I was there like 2.5 weeks before they sent me home without a procedure yet.
Oh,
Oh, wow.
wow.
So
Holy oh,
what happened in
wait.
those 2 weeks?
Um, so it took 3 days to get a room. So I spent one night in the hallway,
Oh, my goodness.
another night in a storage closet.
Holy
And so then they kind of forgot to feed me, but it worked out because like halfway through the second day, they're like, hey, we need to have an angiogram, but they do them under sedation. So they're like, you haven't eaten? And I was like, no, I haven't eaten in days. Mind you, I did an Ironman like 3 days prior, and all I've had is an omelet.
Oh my god.
So, I mean, I know I didn't do the whole thing. Like, I didn't do the run, but like, I still expended a lot
You
of
did a
energy.
lot still. What are you talking about?
And I've had an omelet and maybe a Chick-fil-A sandwich at this point for 3 days.
Wow.
So they admitted me finally to the ICU after they did the angiogram. And while we're in the ICU, they're like, "Oh, you have rhabdomyolysis, and by the way, your arteries are too small to perform a non-invasive procedure for your aneurysm."
Oh.
Hmm.
So they're like, "Yeah, if we were to do it, you would basically just die on the table." And I'm like, "Wow,
Mhm.
Grey's Anatomy is not the best medical education for me to have at the moment
Oh,
because I know what all of this means."
oh wow.
um, So they tried to sell my family on like this experimental procedure that's only been done in like Colombia, which is conveniently where one of the intravenous radiologists, I think that's how you say it. Anyways, the people that don't cut into your brain, but they go in with all their tools, that's where he was from.
Mm.
Or I could go to Switzerland, or I could get FDA approval. So that's kind of where we were stuck. And then they said, we're like, okay, I guess try to get FDA approval. And then they treated me for the rhabdo. They worked with the neuro ophthalmologist to work on my vision. So, I mean, I saw a lot of doctors the whole time I was there. I mean, it was just onslaught of
Mm.
doctors. At one point, I had a really bad night. I mean, my head's pounding the whole time. All of this is going on. Like, I'm never not in pain. And at one point, I thought I would be okay. My family went home, but then they called him back to come because it was like a really harrowing, like knocking on death's door kind of night. And they couldn't figure out why. And they got an MRI and they're like, your brain is just lit up
Mm.
all over the place. There were spots, like you have new spots, lesions on your brain. Like, so I'm getting freaked out the
Oh my
whole time I'm in the
gosh.
hospital. And then they're like, but you can go home now.
What?
We'll start working on FDA approval, but you go home. And I'm like, this sounds
Yeah,
terrifying.
that doesn't sound
Something
right.
just doesn't sound right. Yeah.
So then I went home for about a week. And then I had a really bad headache. And with aneurysms, like if it's the worst headache, you have to go.
Mhm.
And I mean, mind you, my head's been hurting all the time. But now it's like I can't open my eyes. I can't talk to people. Like I basically curled up on the couch and was like, I think I need to go back to the hospital. Um, and so I did. And they're like, well, nothing's wrong with your aneurysm. Like it's not there yet. But we think because I had gotten hit during the swim of the Ironman, they're like, we think maybe you have a brain injury. And so they gave me a bunch of nerve blockers,
Hmm.
like all the shots up and down my head to basically stop the pain. And so it stopped a lot of the physical pain, but not like the headache, if that makes sense. Like I've learned to differentiate between head pain and headache.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like they're not the same. Um, and then yeah, they sent me home again. I did have a meeting with or I had a doctor's appointment with one of the neurosurgeons while I was in the hospital. And I figured since I was in the hospital that he's affiliated with, that he knew I was in the hospital. So, but they called me and they're like, well, are you coming in for your appointment? And I'm like, well, I'm kind of strapped to the bed right now. Like, I will not be there. And they're like, oh, okay, well, we'll just send somebody to your room. And they sent a resident up and they were like, yeah, you're not getting FDA approval. So we're going to have to go in and basically operate, but we're busy. So we'll call you when we're ready. And they sent me home.
Oh my gosh. That's crazy.
What was your husband thinking? What was he saying? I'm curious. What was he thinking about all this? Like having you go and then having seeing you in such horrible pain, and the only thing that they can say to you was, "Well, your aneurysm's not there yet, so go home." Like, oh my gosh, I
I mean, so he said, and I've talked to him about it several times since. He said the scariest night was Ironman Wisconsin that night because he said after the seizures, like I said, I was basically in a self-induced coma. I did not respond to any stimulus. I didn't answer to anything. And, the doctors are like, we don't know what's wrong because all of her labs are perfectly fine, but she's not awake.
Mm.
And they hadn't done anything to induce it. Like it happened in the ambulance. Like when I told everybody to relax,
Yeah.
I relaxed. And he said that was the scariest because he said it was hours like that. And I just kept having seizures.
Mm.
And I've gone back and I've looked at like my medical chart and I'm like, wow, they gave me this drug and this drug. I shouldn't have still had seizures.
Mm.
So it's weird, but it was a lot. He said that was the worst. So I think just being jerked around though, but knowing that there were doctors involved, he said he felt a little better.
Mm.
But he was getting frustrated too with all the back and forth and people like even nurses are like, oh, do you know your care plan? And he's like, no, we're supposed to have surgery. We're supposed to be in the ICU. Now we're not. Now we're going home. What is happening? And even nurses then would start advocating for us and they would get the same. They're like, oh yeah, no, it's this size. Like they didn't even know the size of my aneurysm despite having CTs, MRIs, angiograms. They're like, oh, it's this size. No, it's this size. Oh, it's here. Oh, it looks like that. So it was hard to get information to, oh, your arteries are too small. You need a special procedure, which by the way, turned out to also be a lie.
Oh my gosh.
Oh
I've since had
man.
another angiogram with a new doctor, new hospital, new facility, and he's like, "That's a crock. You're fine. We could have done this minimally invasive."
Oh man.
But so finally, I'm home. I'm somewhat out of pain. I'm wearing an eye patch because again, double vision
Mm.
is fantastic.
So I'm sorry to
Uh,
interject real quick, Robbie. So what did you end up having at this other hospital? Did you have a coil? Did you have what did you end up?
No, so I'm home, I'm waiting, finally I
Oh,
get
I'm
a call from
sorry.
the neurosurgeon. No, you're
Okay.
fine, it's a long story, there's a lot of drama here. Um, no, finally I get a call from, like, the head neurosurgeon, chief of neurosurgery at the hospital that it's been treating me, except for Wisconsin this whole time, and he's like, "If you were my wife or daughter, I would have you in here immediately, this needs to be clipped now." And so, like 3 days later, I showed up for an aneurysm clipping.
Mm,
Oh wow.
okay.
But I guess you took a very scenic route to that destination,
Oh my goodness.
which I guess, in the end you're like, oh, it sounds simple. Uh, but just to arrive to that point, it's amazing how all the hoops you had to jump through. Seems
I'd
crazy.
like to say the hoops stopped after the surgery.
But it didn't? Oh my gosh. Really?
I would never send my family to this hospital ever again.
Mm.
So I went in, I had the surgery. It went off supposedly just fine. I never saw the doc. I saw the doctor once, the neurosurgeon. I saw him one time after that in the ICU, and they didn't have a pain management strategy. So the night
Oh my
of
gosh.
my surgery,
Oh,
I was in recovery, and they pushed too much fentanyl that I started vomiting in the CT because they gave me two mega doses back to back without realizing it.
Oh
Like
boy.
2 different staff, like, so the nurse did it, and then the transport team came with the nurse, and she pushed more because she's like, "Oh, we're about to transport her." So I got 2 back-to-back doses of fentanyl, and I'm in the CT, and I'm like, "I'm gonna vomit," and I fortunately threw up all over the CT machine. Oops.
oopsie.
But but they were like, "Oh, she's having an allergic reaction to pain medicine." And I'm like, "No, it's too much." But they just ignored me.
Of course.
So the rest of the night into the next day, they gave me 1 Tylenol 3.
Oh my gosh.
That was all I had
Oh man.
for, like, 15 hours.
Oh wow.
Jesus. Oh man, Robbie.
That is
I'm so
crazy.
sorry and oh man.
I just have to say you're one tough
Yeah,
lady to
you
go through
are.
that.
Jesus. Now I can
Um,
understand why you're like, "Well, maybe I can run the marathon after," yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so finally we got pain management involved like 2 days later. After the surgery, they started doping me up. They put me on a pain pump for a little while, but then it's so stupid. The nursing staff said it was too hard for them because they were like not short staffed, but like they were at their limit and it took 2 people to switch out a pain pump and they just couldn't spare
It
the
was, like,
resources.
inconveniencing them. Sounds
Yeah.
like, oh, man. Jesus.
So they took it away. And then I was like, "Just send me home, like, I can take," because like, we were having to page them, like, I had somebody with me constantly, like, whether it was my best friend, my husband, my mom, my sister, somebody was constantly there, and they would keep track of my meds because nobody else was doing that, like, on the boards or anything, so we were constantly paging them to get meds, and they were like, "Well, do you wanna go home?" And I'm like, "I can set alarms on my phone and do this by myself." So I did go home, but it was probably 5 days, and I was like, "This has been a long time," but I just w because they delayed, I think, the care and the pain management at the beginning, it set me up kind of for failure.
Mm.
Mm.
And when I saw the neurosurgeon the one time since in the ICU, I was like, "My neck hurts." Like, that was the biggest pain I had was my neck. Like, forget the fact, like, my scar, I don't know about yours, my scar goes around the whole back of my head. Like, you've seen it, right? Like, it's up my spine and it curves around the top,
Yeah,
stops at
yeah,
my
I okay.
it's a big candy cane kind of scar.
Yes.
That's not what hurts. What hurts is my neck. It felt like I had a vice grip. And he says, "Oh, we severed all of your neck muscles to get to your aneurysm because it was completely embedded."
Oh my
And
God.
so, I mean, I was dealing with a lot of that, and then the pain from my head finally kicked in. Um, but so I went home, but I ended up back again. This is like what, my fifth time now, because I had meningitis.
Oh.
Oh no.
So, yeah, that took 2 weeks to resolve, as well, and even when I was still in the hospital, I was like, "Hey, I think it's time for my stitches to come out," and they were like, "Are you sure?" I was like, "Well, I was supposed to have my follow-up with neurosurgery today, and they were gonna take my stitches out because it's 2 weeks." And so at the time, I had like a PA assigned to me because neurosurgery is like, you're not our problem anymore.
Mm.
They just wrote me off. So as I said, I never saw neurosurgery again.
Oh
They
wow.
screwed up my lumbar puncture when I went back for the meningitis. So they had a false read. And then, so I had to have it again. So I ended up with 5 lumbar punctures in total throughout all of this. But yeah, so then I had the meningitis, and that took a while to resolve between antibiotics and steroids. And yeah, then 39 days later, I was home, refusing to ever go back.
Don't I don't blame you.
Oh my
Oh,
God.
man.
That is a crazy ordeal to go through. That total, I guess, ordeal was that how many weeks did that span?
Total, it was about 7.5 weeks between going home and the hospitalizations. From the race date was like September 12th because this all happened the day after my birthday.
Mm.
And I went home November 4th.
Oh wow.
Wow.
That is,
So
yeah. Oh my
That's long.
gosh, that is
Yeah.
long.
Oh.
Since it happened to you in, wow, in September all the
Yeah,
way through
September.
November. Oh wow.
yeah.
That's crazy. So what was recovery like for you after that? So are you probably did you take your care kind of on your own now? I said, I'm gonna
Because
Yeah.
there's no way in hell you're going back to that
okay.
other place. Or
No, I was not going back. So the day I left the hospital, I was on 27 different medications between the pain, the meningitis, the steroids, the antibiotics. I did not go back for pain management to do I mean, I was taking in the hospital, I was on Dilaudid, fentanyl, and then I was taking Oxy every 2 to 4 hours.
Wow.
Different types of Oxy throughout the day. So I left with 3 different prescriptions of Oxy. Um, and I had to detox off of that
oh, wow.
by myself.
Jeez.
Okay.
And I didn't know that I was detoxing. And come Thanksgiving, I was sick. Like, I'm just sick all the time. But I was trying to wean myself off of it, not knowing that, oh, hey, by the way, now you have a pain pill addiction. And this is what happens when you take too much Oxy.
Oh,
But I'm not on any now. So
Mm.
I did it. Once someone told me that's what was happening, I was like, okay, I'm not taking that ever again because that was really hard um, to come off of. And then starting towards the end of December, my best friend, she lived like 5 minutes away from my house. She came over daily and we started walking. Like, even if it was like a half mile,
Mm.
she would walk with me because nobody trusted me by myself, rightfully so. Um, I had really bad balance issues between the vision. My muscles, I lost like 35 pounds while I was in the hospital,
I
just
believe
everything
that.
like atrophying.
Wow.
Mhm.
I mean, they were putting me on like nutrition shakes because yeah, that night that I got one Tylenol, I also had, it was a nurse's first night, by a nursing student's first night that they were letting her be by herself. And she clogged the central line that was in my jugular. And I ended up with a clot in my throat.
Ah!
So I couldn't take in any food. So I was on a liquid diet.
Oh my gosh.
I lost a lot of weight, a lot of strength. Like my ribs were jutting out, which for me is not my body at all. Like, I'm pretty thick. um, so yeah, she would come over and walk with me. And then in January, we were doing like daily miles, and I set a goal with like my tri club was really supportive at the time. So shout out to Cypress Multisport. But they were like, set a goal. And I was like, I'm gonna walk, I think I said like 50 miles, right? Because I was like but I was like a mile a day, a little bit more, I can get there. So I set a goal to walk 50 miles. And then I passed that. And so, like, towards the end of the month, I was like, I'm going to do 100K. I think I can make it. But like the last day, I think I had to do like 4.5 miles. So one of my friends from the club, she's like, yeah, I'll come. We can do a nature walk. And we went on like this 4 mile, like we walked the mountain bike trails that I was usually riding. And I hit 100K for the month of January for walking, which was actually the highest walking month
Woohoo!
of the entire year.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, that's
awesome.
amazing. After
I don't even
that's
think I
just a
could.
couple months
Yeah.
after. Wow.
And your ordeal, man, God, yes, that bracelet, that bracelet um really is telling of who you are. You were in beast mode from the moment you collapsed to the moment you got out of there. And continuing to be in beast mode. If when Rob starts editing all this, he's gonna have to do all those cartoons, like eyeball popping out, like, oh, that's the only thing is it's just unbelievable the amount of hurdles you had to jump through. Um, Gosh, but look at you now. Do you feel like you're do you feel like you're stronger because of it?
Yeah. Um, it was funny. So I was doing a half Ironman, gosh, less than a month ago. And I ended up with really bad blisters, and they were so raw. But I just kept going. Like, at one point I had my shoe off for the half Ironman. Like, I did like 2.5 miles barefoot on the concrete in June, and I
Oh
was
my
like,
gosh.
if any health worker ever tries to tell me I have low pain tolerance again, I'm just gonna throw a shoe at them.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, but ultimately, I think that's how I came to find you too. Was I started walking, and I wanted to. I mean, I had a big goal at the time. I mean, I could barely walk,
Mm,
and I would try to run, and I could barely make it like the length of a driveway, like along the street, like right, not even the width of a driveway. It was like too painful for my neck.
yeah.
Um,
And that's kind of how I found. I think We Run With You is because it was like lined up perfectly with starting like a learn how to run program. Because I mean, when I came home in November, I couldn't even walk. Like, there's videos of me where it's like I can barely move my feet. At one point, I remember I had fallen and I was home alone. Like, my mom had been home with me and she ran off to get soup or something, and I don't even know what happened. Next thing I know, I'm on the floor with like there's soda everywhere. My dogs are having a blast drinking up the soda, and I didn't know what to do, but I didn't want to go back to the hospital because like if you fall, you have to come
Yeah.
back. And I was like, nope.
Yeah.
So I actually had my Alexa call, I think my husband. I was like, Alexa, call my husband. And she starts calling him and he makes sure, oh, Alexa, stop. So he makes sure.
How funny.
But yeah, so, and he's like, what happened? I was like, can you call my mom? She went to go get lunch, but I'm on the floor and I can't get up.
Oh no.
So for me, it really felt like I had to learn how to walk again. I didn't have a lot of deficiencies, but like I couldn't write like
Mm,
that. I don't know, like that transmitter got disrupted that like I couldn't, like if you look at my handwriting, like my son, who I guess at the time was 7, had better handwriting. His is still terrible, by the way. But he had better handwriting than I did at the time. So I picked up the piano. I'd always played growing up, so I started playing the piano again just to try to like fix those
mm.
neurotransmitters to start firing again because I had like zero hand-eye coordination. I couldn't walk, I had no balance. Um, so yeah, it was a big deal for me to then come to like the We Run With You to be like, yeah, I'm gonna run 100 miles.
That's
Or
amazing.
I think it was 50. I can't remember how many because my friends were like, well, how many are you gonna do before I pledge a per mile thing? They're like, I don't want you to just take off. And I was like, no, I think I'm gonna do 50. Because I was starting to do a 5K. And I think when I finally ran that 5K, I came in under my goal with like 20 seconds, which was nowhere near my fastest time or PR. But for me, I'm always like, oh, it's a post brain thing, PR.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's what I kept
Yeah,
saying.
you have
That's
new
You
PRs
have new
now.
PRs now. No, that was yeah, I think that's right because right around the beginning of 2022 was that the 3000 was the LA to Boston. Well, the mile. It just turned out we rounded up slightly to 3000 miles and I remember I believe you were probably if not the first, but maybe the second individual that joined, and I was like, "Rob, look, someone joined," and I think they're pledging a lot of miles too, and I was so excited, and so, of course, I don't know if your account is private or not, but maybe I had to ask for a request to join, and then once I got permission, I'm telling you, I was stalking you, and then when I got to your store, I was like, "This is crazy." So I'm always like, "Rob, look at her. Look at what she's doing." So that's just crazy. But yeah, I understand that Ironman Wisconsin's gonna be put on hold for a little bit, but it just really gets to me every time whenever I see a fellow aneurysm survivor. And now knowing the depth of what you went through, not I mean, having an aneurysm is hard enough, but the hurdle just so that you can get the proper treatment is, um, I I I I just can't even wrap my head around it because you would think maybe it's because, I'm so fortunate and I will shout out their name all the time. Keck Medicine of USC was just so I mean, they were just on point. That's why, like, for the past, 7 years after I recovered, I kept going back to LA to make sure that I raised awareness for Keck Medicine. For of course, I also had a pretty badass neurosurgeon who ended up, running with me, right? I think most people know if they know me, they'll know Dr. Russin. He ran the marathon with me. So it's just that's just so unfortunate and I wish that that didn't have to happen to you at all, even an ounce of what you had to go through.
Kathy had mentioned you've had to fortunately put Ironman Wisconsin on hold, I think for now. But one thing I didn't want to gloss over is, even in the short period of time between, what is it, the end of 2021 till now, you've at least, and you just mentioned, you've at least done one half Ironman,
Yeah.
um, which is an amazing feat. And so I can't imagine doing one, and I haven't gone through what you've gone through in the recent years. Um, but how, I guess, can you maybe talk through us a little bit about that journey between getting started to run and how you were able to do that, and then to where you felt like you're able to, and you were able to do a half Ironman?
Yeah, so I mean, I did a lot of physical therapy because for me, I mean, once I figured out the walking, the one thing that's not hasn't been mentioned is remember the neck. Like they're like, oh, you should be in a C collar, but we can't because of your incision. So my neck went unsupported for this whole time. So I was very stiff, like my whole body turns. Like neurology's like, oh, we can clear you to drive. I'm like, I can't turn, and they're like, oh, you got mirrors. No, it seriously, it like wow. It's like I have double vision. They're like, that's fine. You can block an eye. People drive with one blind eye all the time. I mean, so like honestly, like they were pretty much like, just don't cause us any problems.
Oh, man.
So for neck therapy, my company actually does a really cool, like they never prescribe me physical therapy or anything like that, but my company has a really cool program that does like digital online physical therapy. And you wear these stupid sensors, or not stupid, but they're like really weird looking sensors that like attach to like my neck, like my head and my chest. And it could monitor if I was moving my chest and moving my head. So I had like no rotation in my neck, and now I'm up to like 40%. So if I look stiff, it's just because that's really all I can do.
Oh,
People are always thinking like my computer was frozen because I just sat there and like talked to people, like when I went back to work on Zoom calls and stuff, like, you don't move, you have such great posture, and I'm like, oh yeah,
I do.
I don't have a choice. So I did a lot of physical therapy through that program. And I had a dedicated physical therapist who worked with me through a lot of that in terms of getting my neck there. And so once that progressed, then I was like, oh, okay, I think I want to start going back into triathlon again, because that was really where I liked to be. I liked the people, I like the space, I like the sport, I like the support you get. Like I'm a back of the packer, but I never feel unsupported, except for that second loop. Anyways, so I really wanted to get back to there, but it was hard because how do you find a coach when you're like, oh, hey, by the way, my brain is like really fun. Um, and I don't know what's happening, right? Like, I don't know we don't know what caused it. We don't know what happened. They told me I've got the aneurysm, but nobody's seen me in a while. So I was really fortunate to sign up with somebody who was there. She saw me kind of from the sidelines of everything I went through. And she was a coach herself, but at the time she hadn't been my coach, but she is now. And she's like, yeah, you can do this. There's no reason why you should limit your
Mm.
potential. Oddly enough, her company is called Mind Over Matter. So, like the messaging was there for me. They had supported me through when I was in the hospital. She makes the best oatmeal cookies. And I got a lot of cared packages delivered. But then she was like, yeah, I would love to be your coach. I think we can absolutely get you there. And she has been like the biggest godsend when it comes to training, adapting. Like I had an angiogram and she's like, well, let's see what you can do. How are you with this? She went back. I still have headaches that I still get treated for. But she looked at my headache logs and she lined them up to my workouts. Like not just looking at my workouts, but she's like, what was your heart rate for those workouts? And she's like, did you know when your heart rate is in, zone 4, zone
Mhm.
5 for too long, you tend to have a headache the next day? I had no clue.
That's
I
so
never, and
smart. That's
wow.
really good.
this was within like a month of training. She'd already figured all of this out, and helping me navigate that. So I think that she has just been
Can we
fantastic
have her
in
name?
support. It's Katie Solbo. She's the
We
best.
love you,
Shout out,
Uh,
Katie.
Katie.
Shout out to Katie Lobo. Love you. Oh my gosh. You're so lucky. So wow. Okay, now my heart is like getting all light and fluff. Yeah, because before I was all tensed up because I was so upset. Now I'm like, yes, she has a great advocate now. Such a great caregiver. That's awesome. Okay. Go I'm sorry. Go on. Go on.
oh no, you're fine. So that's what we were talking about this morning when I sent you a text. Like, oh hey, I hope this doesn't change things because I'm gonna
No.
push Ironman, because collectively she's like, can you do it? Absolutely. Are you gonna survive it? Which for me is always, am I gonna survive? She's like, number one. She's like, yeah, you'll survive it, but you won't have fun with it. And she knows, like, for me, especially at my, with everything I've been through, I'm at the point, like, if it's not fun for
Mm.
me, I mean, what's the point? Like, I'm not, and it sounds like a little harsh. I laugh at my trauma a lot. But I'm not at the point I'm going to kill myself to finish a race. Like, once it stops being fun, I'm okay. Like, I've had to relive a DNF. I mean, there was a guy in the ICU when I was explaining everything that happened, and he's like, "Oh, you bombed? How sad." Like, that's literally what he said to me, and I was like, "I wanna punch this man." But I had to relay this story so many
Mhm.
times that, even today, it doesn't upset me to relay it, but I'm just kinda like, I think a lot of what we put on ourselves as athletes to finish and do things, like, it's not that serious, and it's not paying my bills, it's my hobby, it's something I just wanna have fun with. So we came to the decision, like, yeah, I could get grit through. It would suck. I would struggle, but I would be fine. I mean, for an Ironman, that's what you expect
Mhm.
anyways. But after going through everything, knowing I don't want it to just be the end all for me, it makes sense for me to push it off a year, and that way I can really just have some fun with
Yeah.
it.
And, I really have to say that and I always tell people this too, and I don't know if you could tell what type of personality I am from some of my posts, but I'm quite competitive, but and I don't know, and that's the thing, I don't know how to do things for fun. Um, I always say, "Yeah, I'm gonna do it for fun," but no, I don't. But what I'm trying to say is that, when people, like, push off, let's say, a major race, whether it be a marathon or even just a race in general, because they are, they don't want it to do more harm than there needs to be. And I think, to be honest with you, I think that takes a lot more guts and courage because I'm still finding myself in a position where I'm like, I can't push a race because I don't know. So I wish I had what you have. I'm envious of that. I really am because I'm just like, yeah, I wish I can do things for fun. I know Rob's gonna be like, "The next time you wanna sign up for something, I'm gonna remind you of what you said." But yeah, I think, when you texted me earlier today to say, "Does it change?" I'm like, "No, it does not change anything at all." I think if anything, you are so absolutely courageous to do something that is right for you, and that's why I said, "Do you." So kudos to you and your coach for leading you to that place where you're fine with that, you know? Um, yeah. Uh, and I'm sure the time will come, but
Mhm.
and yeah, it's just I commend you. Yeah. I give you a
Yeah,
lot
I
of
think one
credit.
thing I think I've learned is that what's because we're always so focused. I guess I think most people are so focused on results.
Mm,
Finishing this or getting this certain time goal, and as I've gotten older, I've learned that it's really the journey that's important because right, I mean we've reached destinations in whether it's sports, running, triathlons, or even like our careers. We reach that destination and then you look around and you go, okay, so that didn't really, it's like my life didn't change all of a sudden to like some spiritual nirvana or something. It's like it's life goes on, and then you're like you look back and you're like actually it's the journey that's important. It's
mhm,
like this reaching this destination did not change anything. The journey continues, and I'm just off to something else. And I think the way I look at it, for you it's this is just part of your journey, and
mhm.
that journey yet will may still and likely still lead to another Ironman. And by the way, Kathy and Laura and Dr. Russell are doing Ironman California later this year.
Just if
But
you want to
Yay!
hop
that's
on.
another potential destination point.
Yeah,
But
just in case if you want to. push it to California, we'd love to have you on our try team, you know?
So, I mean, that's just the way I look at it.
Yeah.
Is there something that you want from organizations like us to bring um, to for patients like you to bring out there, or to support, or to fund, or to advocate for?
I think seeing the relationship that you had with your neurosurgeon made me feel like, yeah, I got the short end of the stick when it came to my medical care, but it also helped push me to say, like, but it can get better. Like, there's better out there. Like, what I got was not the standard. So I think seeing that helps. And then like for me, like I always feel awkward because like, yeah, I had a brain aneurysm. And I mean, they're like, we don't know how you didn't die was one of the things somebody said to me. Like, I don't know how yours didn't rupture because it was completely multilobulated and, all different points of rupture that it could have happened, but it never did. So like, I'm always like, people want to raise funds for that awareness for the research and advocating to get checked ahead of time. And I think that that's important because, yeah, my story's messed up, but I never ruptured. And for that, like for me, that's the biggest blessing is like, I didn't have that threat, that loss of life, or, that harder recovery, that potential of death. Like I was probably there a couple of times. My family probably thought I was. But for me, like, and I know if this is my spirit or not. Um, yeah, I feel so fortunate that I didn't. And I think that because those two guys, those two students in that hospital room that day looked so concerned for me. That's really just what I hold, is like thank God for them.
Mhm.
And so my last question is, um, do you have any advice, you'd like to give to someone that may be going through, what you're going through, it, um, either much early on in their journey, or kind of where you are at now?
Um, I would question everything. I know like we can't see inside our brains, so a lot of times we do have to take what the doctors tell us at face value. But I wish I had asked more questions or gotten more second
Mm.
opinions. I mean, it's hard, right? When they tell you like, oh, a rupture is imminent, like don't laugh because you could. I mean, the list of don'ts if you have a brain aneurysm is crazy. If it's serious but not ruptured, I'm like don't poop, like
Oh
don't.
my gosh.
I mean, it's pretty dumb. Um, but yeah, I would question it, and make sure you're confident in the care you get. Make sure you like the people because you're going to be around them for a while.
Very true.
Yeah. Well, Robbie, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I think it will help a lot of people. As we continue to raise awareness, I think just hearing your story, as hard as it may be to tell these stories, I think it will really, I think it's very valuable, and I think it will help a lot of people. So
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having
Yeah.
me. I appreciate it.
And the fact that I'm just gonna say one more thing. The fact that you can relay the horrible experience that you have with some comedic, um, you know, spirit to it really does say a lot about, who you are. I think y you know, it's gonna all it's by the end of season 2, I hope a lot of people don't think like, "Gosh, Kathy's gonna go there again." It sounds so cliche, but, when I decided to redo, you know, the podcast or bring it back, I already had individuals in mind, and I'm just gonna let you know right now that I those individuals that I already had in mind, I was like, I want them to share this story because I one, it's so powerful. Two, it just so happens that you are an athlete as well, getting back to doing what you love. But now just having this hour plus, conversation with you, which we had initially like, "Oh, it's 45 minutes," but gosh, your story is just
Sorry.
so intriguing. No, I love it, I love it. And no, it's just the fact that you are sharing it with us with, like I said, some comedic spirit there, but gosh, you have so much grace s in telling it too, because I don't think I could have that much, um, uh patience, let's just say. Yeah, I totally f gosh, I just feel so much more, uh, grateful for the care that I had, and I'm hoping that, our organization and, other organization and foundation will continue to advocate and spread awareness so that there will be less of what you went through for unfortunately for future, aneurysm patients. But again, like Rob said, thank you so much for taking the time to have a talk with us. It was a crazy conversation. But yeah,
A lot more than you bargained
yeah.
for.
Hey, no, I love it, and I'm hoping that one of these days, being that, we share the love of triathlons, um, maybe one day we can be at the same race circuit. You never know, right? That could be my
Yeah,
goal could be, let's do a sprint, try whatever with uh with Robbie. My coach did say
yeah.
I should do 70.3 Wisconsin. We'll see. Isn't
Hey.
it when is that, by the way?
So it's September 9th this
Oh,
year, but it's already
okay.
closed.
Yeah, it's
But I mean, there's always next year.
yeah.
I can cheer you on Saturday and you cheer me on Sunday.
Yeah, that would be awesome, right? Yeah. September. Yeah, yeah, I think I was looking at that because it would fall into a good timeline for October 22nd. But yeah, next time. Next time.
There's always Des Moines, which is what I'm considering for next year
Yeah.
too.
Ah,
Yeah. Well, you make sure I'm gonna continue to follow you and your journey through social media, and just know that we're always going to be rooting for you. We Run With You is a nonprofit with a mission to improve the lives of people suffering from brain injury and disease by funding research, raising awareness, and providing support for survivors and their families. Find out more at werunwithyou.org. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a comment or review. Until next time, keep doing good.